Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it is time for a tier list where I go over the discography of an artist, a band. I rank their albums in that studio discography in this handy little tier list over here, S being the best, F being the not so best. And in this episode, we are doing the legendary, the celebrated, the fantastic and amazing UK punk band, The Clash, Joe Strummer and the gang. Yes, they have a pretty solid discog, which we will be going over in this video. I will tell you to take some of my opinions on The Clash with a grain of salt, because I do have a few takes on their stuff that go against the grain of popular opinion. So having said that, let's kick things off with their debut record, 1977's self-titled record, The Clash. As far as UK punk goes, historically, this is a pretty definitive record. You're not really going to get much more classic, by the numbers, by the book, UK punk blueprint than this record. Maybe this and Nevermind the Bollocks. That's probably a little bit more quintessential UK punk, but still, if that is the case, then this comes in at a very close second. Having said all of that, though, as far as punk music goes, generally, I find The Clash's debut record to be very boilerplate. Many of the catchiest songs on here feel very rudimentary, and not even in sort of like an exciting, balls to the wall, we're going to play as aggressively as we can type of sense. I feel like the Pistols and a lot of other bands from the UK, such as like Discharge, for example, were much better at delivering a certain rawness and gruffness than even The Clash were during their earliest days here. I think there were some tracks on this record that showcased the band's true talent for songwriting, such as Remote Control, even some of the reggae flavors they would delve into a bit more deeply later on in their career. To me, these are truly the sounds and ideas that define The Clash's best records, not so much a track like "Rah, rah, I wanna rah, 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 rah some more," which, again, mind you, by punk standards, these tracks aren't bad, but the longer I sort of distance myself from the earliest times that I listened to this record, and believe me, the flavor on this album, even in my punkiest of punk phases, it sort of waned for me pretty quickly. You know, there were other punk records that to me felt harder, more memorable, bolder, catchier. It was The Clash's more pop and reggae and really everything-oriented works down the road that to me felt more artistically significant, that felt more memorable, that felt more colorful. I am honestly feeling pretty much a C on this record. You know, I mean, it's listenable, it's fine, but as far as punk music goes, especially with time having passed and me feeling like you really needed to be there in order for this record to truly mean something for you, to me, it just has not aged well over the years. You know, there are punk records that came out around this time that, again, I find much more interesting. You could say Nevermind the Bollocks. Again, a couple of super catchy, enjoyable tracks on this thing. Love the Police and Thieves cover on here too. But a lot of the punkier, more political, more socially geared tracks on this thing, to me, just feel like cheap sloganeering. It feels like as fashionable as punk gets around this time in The Clash's discography. Moving on from there, though, the record The Clash dropped next, their sophomore record in 1978. While many people favor the debut over this record, I actually prefer this record. And look, it's not a perfect album. I think that it's clear the Clash were trying to go a bit more focused, a bit more commercial on this record. It's a pretty straightforward, roaring punk rock record with super loud guitars. The production generally on this one is a lot cleaner, a lot clearer, more punch coming from the drums as well. The vocals are a bit more prominent, and the songwriting is a bit more direct too. I think there are more vocal harmonies. I think the choruses are a bit catchier. So while, yeah, it's not as raw punk, I feel like going in a slightly more mature direction panned out well for The Clash because, look, their talents at the end of the day, I don't think were just in writing this thrash and bash type of rock music, you know, writing these well-structured, loud, harmony-laced rock tunes and just songs in general, I think just ended up being a more fitting thing for them. Yeah, none of their biggest hits really land on this record, but if you just try to take this out of the context of the Clash's biggest hits, there's some amazing tracks on this record. Safe European Home is incredibly enjoyable. Julie's Been Working for the Drug Squad is very funny and very witty. All the Young Punks, which is kind of a slow burner, but still I think lyrically is a kind of apt critique of punk as a social movement and where it was headed, and how you sort of see people who are a part of the scene getting kind of ground into the gears of the hustle and bustle of modern everyday society, and punk as a movement, as an art form, kind of losing its social purpose in a way. I think there's some pretty essential songs on this record that were kind of important for the Clash moving on to do what they would do on their next LP. So the Clash, Give 'Em Enough Rope, sophomore LP that, again, people tend to overlook and undersell. I think it's solidly a B record. I think it's a fine record. I, again, enjoy it more than the debut LP. The songwriting and everything on the record feels a bit more dynamic, even if the band just kind of concentrates their sound generally in this more very aggressive, just straight rock-oriented direction. The instrumental and stylistic diversity that was even on their debut doesn't show up here, but I think the material overall is a bit more quality on the whole. Moving on from there, the Clash's next LP, their 1979 album, London Calling, easily their most critically acclaimed album. I don't think it's their most their most widely selling record. I think that would most likely go to Combat Rock, as that has their biggest hits on it. But still, this record gets many more of the critical accolades, many more of the fan accolades, and there's good reason as to why. I mean, this record is fantastic. It's an amazing album. Easily one of the greatest rock records of all time. And despite the aggressive display of instrument destruction on the front cover, no, it's not kind of this super wild, punked out expression of rage. It's a pretty measured, perceptive, smart, and well-groomed, diverse rock record with songs on here that feel a little funky, a little groovy, kind of punk-inspired, rock and roll inspired. There are reggae-inspired songs on this thing too. Pretty much every track on this record seems to be coming from a different place stylistically, and the Clash nails it every single time. Whether you're talking about Spanish Bombs, whether you're talking about the title track, which is so foreboding, such an excellent tone setter to the record, whether or not you're talking about quick and I guess bustling, funny little tunes like Lost in the Supermarket, or even amazing, thick, bassy reggae jams like Guns of Brixton, one of the Clash's most menacing in their entire catalog. Cannot say enough positive things about this record. Again, despite how diverse it is and all over the place it is stylistically, it is such a fun, engaging, always enjoyable record, super solid from front to back. Despite being as long as it is, this record is 1 hour and 5 minutes, 19 songs, which is kind of unusual for a rock album around this time. I mean, even the Clash's records up until this point were around like 30 minutes, 40 minutes or so. Going super ultra long on this LP over here was quite a statement, and the Clash really truly did pull it off, and the success and creative achievements of this record, I think, would influenced the band to get even more ambitious on their next LP, which we will talk about now. I'm putting this in the S category because, again, it is amazing. In my opinion, the best record in the Clash's discography, one of the best rock albums of all time. Can't go wrong with it. I think it still sounds bold and fun and colorful and catchy to this day. I don't know if there are going to be many more rock albums to come down the pipe that are going to be better than this one. All right, moving on from there. The 1980 album from The Clash, Sandinista. Now, like I said, with London Calling, The Clash did go long. They went 19 songs, over an hour of material. This is a triple LP, if I remember correctly. It's 36 songs. It is well over 2 hours long. It is a very, 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 very big artistic undertaking, and even more stylistically diverse than London Calling was. To be that stylistically diverse was Not that common of a thing in 1979. And you have The Clash pushing that even further on this record with songs that, of course, touch all of the stylistic bases that London Calling did, the reggae songs, the rock and roll songs, the punk songs, so on and so forth. But now, on Sandinista, you have tracks that go into a bit more of a disco vein, tracks that go into more of a new wave vein, tracks that are fairly experimental, tracks that have a bit of a calypso thing. Like the Clash is really insane on this record for doing or attempting to do what they were trying to do. Not a whole lot of major singles dropping off of this LP, despite how many tracks were on it. I believe the Magnificent Seven was the biggest track to come off of this LP, which is a fairly great dance song. It's just not one of the Clash's most popular singles in their greater discography. But still, having said all of that, I still think this record is pretty enjoyable. And even though there is a lot of I guess you would say tracks that are unnecessary. It's overly long. Not every song is all that gratifying. It does kind of drag on forever. I mean, we're talking about, enough material to fill up a Swans album and then some. So despite it being way longer than it needs to be, I think that argument is fairly objective in regards to this record. I do think there is a quality, awesome, almost London's Calling quality album hidden amongst all of these tracks. Despite there being so many songs that are not amazing, there are a lot of fairly fantastic tracks on this record, truly and honestly. So it's just really kind of a matter of digging through all of it and just trying to digest all of it and not speed through the record too fast to the point where you're kind of losing touch with what you're listening to, because it is a lot of material to take in. There is a lot going on, and it's not like the band are embarking on these super long half-hour experimental music excursions. They're hitting you with one track, one banger, one dance track, one experimental moment after the next. So The Clash, easily their most versatile and ambitious musical statement ever. Even if I do enjoy London Calling more, I think it's pretty undeniable that they really tried to pull out all the stops on Sandinista. I put it in the B category. I think it's a fairly enjoyable album. I think it's a super creative album. I think it's a risky album. Again, not every risk pans out, but there are a lot of great tracks on this thing, and it's amazing to hear The Clash post London Calling just continue to venture out and just do cool shit. Moving on from there, let's get into the Clash's 1982 record, maybe their most well-known record, if not simply because of tracks like Should I Stay or Should I Go, or
Rock the Casbah.
Also, you could even make the argument that MIA kind of owes a good portion of her career to the track Straight to Hell, because the key sample off of the track Paper Planes comes off of that song, that weird little opening guitar line, that groove, that beat. But still, combat rock. It has some highlights on it. It has some good tracks on it. It has a fairly diverse array of songs and styles on it, but it almost feels like I'm listening to Sandinista, but this is a more neutered, direct, less experimental, less all over the place version of that. Sure, you do have tracks that are fairly dancey and glitzy and fun. Sure, you do have tracks that are fairly straightforward rock songs. Sure, you do have moments that feel a little reggae inspired. I mean, again, all those influences, they're still there. But some of the songwriting can get pretty tedious. The vocals and the guitars and the production are nowhere near as out there or as bold. Maybe there's some listeners out there who hate how, vast and indirect and, explorative Sandinista is. It's a pretty challenging album in that sense, and it's not really a record you could just kind of sit down and kind of listen to casually, because it's going to hit you with some weird moments. It's going to last forever, or at least it's going to feel like it's lasting forever if you're not paying at least some attention to it. Combat rock is kind of a more chill, just feel good. We're going to hit you where it hurts, hit you with the sounds that we know are going to play well. It's that kind of record. It's trying to be as commercial as possible. It certainly succeeded on that front by bringing some high-powered singles, some low-powered deep cuts, and a lot of tracks that land somewhere in the middle but are still generally agreeable and likable. I could see why the record still plays fairly well amongst people who are just starting to get into the Clash and into punk music in general, but this is far from, I think, the most interesting record the Clash has ever dropped. I think it's really just as somewhat enjoyable, but still kind of as underwhelming as the debut. It has some fairly decent songs on it, but it's not really anything to write home about outside of a handful of great tracks on it. I mean, if you just simply pay attention to the hits on this thing and a few other key tracks, you're not really missing all that much, in my opinion. But hey, let's move on to really the cherry on top of the Clash's discography, the record that was so terrible it pretty much ended the band itself, and that is the 1985 album Cut the Crap. At this point in the Clash's career, the band was pretty much just smashed apart, reformed, new sound, new lineup, new everything, and Joe Strummer was essentially leading the band into a new era, and that's essentially what brought us to Cut the Crap. And this record saw the band moving into, I guess, a new fusion of punk rock and synth punk. You could say there were aspects of this record that were inadvertently bringing in characteristics of maybe industrial music, maybe even hip-hop music, with how Joe was delivering vocally over some of these very synthetic and sequenced beats. But this is a horrid record. This record sucks. It's amazing that The Clash can really lay claim to one of the best albums ever in rock, and also one of the worst albums ever in rock. Because the production on this thing is terrible. The songwriting is really, really crap. Despite the title, it feels like the Clash does nothing but deliver crap on this thing. I'm really still at a loss for words for how much of a faceplant this record is. It's rare that a band of this profile fails quite this hard. I bought a copy of this when I was in high school just out of sheer curiosity, knowing that it wasn't going to be that good, and I was actually just blown away by how bad it was. God, the synths on this record suck. The mixes are piss. The vocals are just completely out of whack on so many songs, and there are tracks on this thing like Dictator that are filled with so many weird fucking nonsensical bells and whistles sound effects that it's like, what the fuck are you doing? This is just a mess of shit. So I don't really have too much more to say about this record other than it's an F. It's an F. It is a very, very, very bad record. It is not a very good at all record. However, it is so bad, and it's so out there, and it is so just unorthodox for a band like The Clash to do something like this, that it's still kind of interesting to listen to. I would still rank Cut the Crap as a slightly more intriguing listen than Combat Rock. Not to say that it's more enjoyable listen than Combat Rock. It's certainly not. But if you're somebody who nerds out over sounds, especially over weird, stylistic, musical red herrings from decades and decades and decades ago, weird shit that just didn't pan out or influence anything else. Or if you're kind of a production nerd and you want to just hear some vintage production sounding really bad, you want to hear an example of old school production that sounds horrid, I would try out The Clash's Cut the Crap. I guess you can kind of look at it and dissect it sort of like a scientist. So a fantastical failure from The Clash, Cut the Crap, final album, 1985, in the F category. Everything else is well above that and enjoyable to some degree or another. Love London Calling. If I had to pick another record slightly below that, I would say Sandinista as far as enjoyability of the best tracks, just generally being interesting. Give Them Enough Rope, fantastic. Many people enjoy the debut much more than me, but if you don't mind your punk being a little mean potatoes, give that one a try too. And Combat Rock, plenty of catchy songs on there, though not every track hits as hard as songs like Should I Stay or Should I Go? So there you go. That has been our Clash tier list. Thank you very much for watching. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, The Clash, forever.